I'm Juliet Riddell, and I directed it thanks to Stephen, who asked me to direct it because we'd done this film together before, and I was just really honoured to be able to work on this film, and written so brilliantly by Clare.
Hi. Are we just like freestyling? Okay. Yes. So I'm Clare, and I wrote it because Stephen asked me to, and I mean.
Well, it's something that you wanted to write, wasn't it? It wasn't like I didn't say,
no,
come on and we'll do something about suicide.
No, Stephen said, would you write something for the 40th anniversary? Because we'd worked together before, obviously, first of all, on a field day play that we put on, that we were here exactly 9 years ago, actually, Stephen, on this very day.
Were we?
Yeah, we were rehearsing it because we had a play on at the Playhouse 9 years ago. And then we did Hard Border, which Juliet commissioned me to write, and then Stephen was in for the Financial Times. And then cut to 2019, and Stephen said 2020 was the anniversary, so could I write something poetic for then, and then we would put it out in 2020. But little did we know that wasn't going to happen, and that's why we're sitting here near the end of 2021 doing it. So, but anyway, it was something that I wanted to write because, for obvious reasons, too many people have died, and it's something I feel really strongly about. I don't think anybody couldn't, but we were chatting before we came here. Somebody was asking me about the motivation behind it, and I said that I remembered reading an article in the New Yorker magazine years ago that really stuck in my head, and it was interviews with people who had tried to take their own life but hadn't been successful. And one man said that he survived miraculously jumping off a bridge, and he was like really determined that he nothing would have stopped him doing it. But the second that his foot left the bridge, he didn't want to die. And he said, he was a really, really lucky, but so many people must have felt like that. And I know it's a topic which is huge in Derry and really painful for everybody who lives here. So for Stephen as well, it was very important that we filmed here, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, very much so, yeah. But I mean, even today I saw some activity around on the river, and the people who are trying to help people, so it's obviously it's terrible everywhere, but it's pretty bad in this town. And I have no idea what you do about it, really. It's
well, I suppose one of the reasons why, it might sound too grand, and I don't want it to sound grand because I feel like if it helps one person, then this will be a great success for us. But it's the idea, I suppose, that everybody has a voice in their head which is negative, and for some people that can really take over. And we were sort of thinking about this film as voices that weren't like that. So if you watch a film, it's like you're listening to those voices, and if they plant a seed inside your subconscious somehow, then maybe those will be the words that will come up if you feel any sort of despair.
One of the things that was interesting about it from my perspective was because of that, there is something almost subliminal about the poem, and not all the lines land immediately, and it is something that sort of gets into your head. And I've watched it so many times, and now I hear lines differently, but you never really. One of the interesting things you said to me at the beginning was that it's not that you have to hear everything, it just has to somehow sink in. So I really thought about that in terms of how you kind of created that space in a head. I also wanted to honour the fact that it was from a company that's heritage is in theatre, so it isn't coincidence that we filmed it in the Playhouse and that it does feel theatrical, but that there was something interesting about a piece that you don't have to sort of hear immediately. And that's how you wrote it, right?
I suppose that is what I love about poetry, because it can wash over you and then something like just pings at some point, which is the technical poetic term that all academics use. Ping.
And all the actors, because they were a funny combination, weren't they, between, and I don't know how you felt, Stephen, reading it, because there was a sort of funny place between acting and reading, wasn't there, in terms of whether the voices were characters or whether they weren't, and how we sort of placed them in that funny, slightly middle ground between the two, because we didn't want the characters to overwhelm the words.
No, I thought we were kind of ourselves, you know, and the closer it was to ourselves, the better, really. You know, maybe that's not true.
I think so, yeah, but we thought about that, I suppose, in the casting, of the fact that you were different people and came from different backgrounds.
And there was, you know, I mean, there were things like we wanted to have a diverse sound as well, didn't we? We wanted to have Dublin and Northern and...
Because it is something that affects anybody, so I suppose you didn't want to have, you know, 4 actors who looked similar or came from similar experiences.
But also there was a sense that they are also, even though they were different voices, but in some senses they were also the same voice, and the way that they sort of leave off from each other and speak to each other was also really important.
And also, I suppose, in terms of Field Day, that Field Day has a history of pamphlet making, and it was sort of like a visual pamphlet, wasn't it? That's kind of what we were thinking at the beginning.
Yeah, and of course Seamus created the pamphlet idea, so that's for him tonight as well. Yeah. And
then I felt that Stephen liked Hard Border. Maybe I felt that what you liked about it partly was because it was very rooted in a real place. And so to use to make sure that Derry itself was so important to the visual language of the film. And I had an amazing day out on the river with the Foyle Search and Rescue, understanding about the situation here, and going out on the river was hugely informative, and that's why, you know, the river really had to be part of it. But I wanted to be sensitive to not sort of glorify the river or how to approach the river sensitively, but it was impossible to make a film here without the river being visually very present. Do you think we should ask if anyone has any questions?
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, do you want to ask any questions? Or?
How did you decide who was going to speak which parts? Did the characters themselves take the lines? Were they attracted to the lines? Or was it something, how did you work that through?
That's a good question. I think when I was writing it, I had an idea I definitely knew initially which voice Stephen was going to be, because he was the voice of hope, which obviously is, you symbolise, hopeful. But it was sort of that the poetic, the slower poeticism, and I love how Stephen, don't tell him, but I love how he says, you know, how he speaks the language and just understands it, and also appears not to be doing anything with it, but does everything with it. And so the one of the voices was the kind of thread of hope that talked about nature and everything. And I knew right at the beginning when I was writing it that I wanted Stephen to do that. And then the other 3 voices were, it could have been any, really, couldn't it? Like the other 3 actors could have taken them. And then amazingly, like they all brought their own brilliance to it. Like it was amazing for me to be able to see what they did with the words then that were like the raw material. I don't know if that answers the question properly, but yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, okay.
No? Oh yeah.
Can we say what we found very powerful?
Absolutely.
I think it was really great how you concentrated on this one lane and then how the camera really goes into the wall. But I have a question too. How do you want to reach the audience that film is relevant for?
Well, do you want to answer first and then I'll answer?
Well, I mean, because it was a poem rather than a script, I suppose I was keen to make sure there was still a kind of narrative and there was a thrust and there was a propulsion through the film. And so quite early on I had this feeling that we had to be on a journey of somebody going through the city, and the idea of heading to the river. And then by spending this day here in Derry, the director of photography, Philip, and I were amazed at how many places there were that went between light and dark, and how many alleys there were, and we just kept seeing, and also the fences. And I'm from London, I'm not from here, and I was sort of struck by the history of the city with the wall, and there's these blocks, and then there's these lights that open up, and there's these windows. And then we have the Fountain Estate with the fencing, and you kind of go past it sort of judders between the sort of the dark and the light. And suddenly all around us we kept seeing this kind of interplay between light and dark. And then also in the walls, it was striking seeing these sort of moments of these trees and the sort of nature coming through the concrete. And so also the interplay between the sort of the physicality of the city, but also the interplay of nature. So this kind of light and dark, and that was so present in Clare's poem. And she kept talking about walls and void, and I just really felt that very physically. And then the idea of having the actors stand in a square was really important to me, because at first it's like, well, how are they going to stand? Are they in the room together, or are they standing in a line? And because Clare had been influenced by Beckett, I started to look at Beckett's work, and he created this amazing film where these four sort of characters move around in a square, and it just felt
very
really
strange,
right.
very strange.
Very strange film, but I loved it. And so yes, that interplay between dark and light and void is sort of central to how the piece is created.
And then you were asking the second part of how we would hope to get it to people who needed to hear it. And I suppose my feeling is that not in a sort of egomaniacal way that everybody needs to hear it, like the whole world, but just more like, I think many people experience feelings of despair, or even if you don't go to the extent of wanting to end your own life feeling that you aren't worth full, or, and I think my feeling, which again we were talking about earlier, was, if you can possibly get it out to as many people as possible, the hope is that just it would help one person. If it helps one person, then that's it. And with all of these things, they're just creative arrows that you just shoot out. And, we did everything that we could, and, maybe a few thousand people have seen it so far, but it isn't time dependent. So you just hope that people share it, and as many people as possible, pass it on to as many people as possible. And I suppose that's one of the benefits of the social world, media type world that we live in, even though it has so many negatives, that you just hope, it reaches as wide an audience as possible. And in a way, we can't really control that. You just have to hope.
Where is it available?
It's online, so it's RTE launched it on their platform on World Suicide Prevention Day, which was in September.
You can find it on YouTube, actually, if you put in Stay Alive into YouTube. Thank you.